is June 25th, 1997. We're conducting an interview with the survivor, Erna Waltuch, Erna, Waltuch. Carol, S-H-A-C-R-R-O. The interviewer is Marcy Rosenberg, M-A-R, Friedman, R-O-S-E-N-B-R-G. We're in St. Louis, Missouri, United States of America. My name is Marcy Rosenberg. Today's date is June 25th, 1997. I'm conducting an interview with Erna Waltuch, and we are in St. Louis, Missouri, United States of America.
You don't uncover that?
Please give me your name and spell it for me.
My name is Erna Waltuch, E-R-N-A-W-A-L-T-U-C-H.
And was this your name at birth?
Shapiro. Erna Shapiro.
And your first name?
Erna.
And how do you spell your last name?
At birth? S-H-A-P-I-R-O.
Did you have any other names?
No,
Hebrew names?
my Hebrew name is Esther.
How do you spell that?
I would say E-S-T-H-E-R.
And when is your birth date?
September 23rd, 1920.
And what is your age today?
I'm going to be 77, September the 3rd.
September what?
September the 23rd.
Okay. What were your parents' names?
My mother's name was Rachel Leah Shapiro. My father's name was Isaac Shapiro. My mother's maiden name was Barash, B-A-R-A-S-H.
And did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had one sister. Her name was Sarah Shapiro, and a brother, Norbert Shapiro. My sister unfortunately perished in the Holocaust. She was married, and my brother-in-law's name was Leo, and their family name was Weiss, W-E-I-S-S. And they had an infant named Danny.
And where were you born?
I was born in Vienna.
Where were your parents born?
My parents were born in Poland. Do you want the names of the city?
Sure.
My mother was born in Stoyanov, S-T-O-J-A-N-O-V, and my father was born in Toporov, T-O-P-O-R-O-V.
When did they move to Vienna?
They moved to Vienna on the onset, I believe, in 1914. My father was in the Austrian army and did not return until 1919.
What did he do in the army?
He was an officer, and he was fighting at the front.
Tell me about your home in Vienna.
We had what you call in the United States a condo. There were 4 rooms. A nice kitchen, bathroom, living room, part dining room, and an extra bedroom. And my sister was in a boarding school, so I shared the bedroom with my brother. We had a dry goods store, rather textiles, on the downstairs of the building. We occupied about 3 big windows. My father imported linens from Belgium and textiles from England. And we led a very middle-class, good life. We had everything we needed and wanted. During the summer, we went to the country. We rented a farm home, so to speak, and we didn't have a private car, so we went out with a truck and the beginning of the summer. And when we came back, my mother had pickled pickles. She made jam, and she also made pickled tomatoes, and we used to love that. She kept that through in the basement, which was very cold. This was not a finished basement like we have here, but it was very primitive. And we had all these goodies during the winter. And my father used to commute every Friday and go back to the business Monday morning by train. And we had a wonderful time in the country. I learned how to milk a cow when I was about 10 years old, and I enjoyed that. And when my father used to come out over the weekend, we went hiking. We picked berries, we picked mushrooms, and we enjoyed the summer. It was not regimented camp like it is here, but we enjoyed the freedom of the country and the beauty of the Vienna surroundings.
At home, what was a typical day like for you?
A typical day, I remember going to school. I didn't walk by myself. Either my mother or my father walked me. We had classes at 8 o'clock in the morning, even in elementary school. And came back about 1 o'clock, had our big meal, and then the store was closed between 1 and 3, and after that we went to Hebrew school. And until about 7 o'clock in the evening. Then we had a light supper, did our homework, and went to bed.
The apartment building where you lived, was it mostly Jewish people?
Mostly it was a 24-family unit complex, so to speak. And there was a courtyard, and we played. And my sister-in-law, Helene Halpern, she was Helene Waltuch. We were very close, and we palled around together most of the time, including all the other friends. And it was very enjoyable. We didn't know any different, and we didn't know any better, but this was good. We went to the movies later on as teenagers. We had to be chaperoned. We did not go by ourselves. Under 16, you could not go by yourself. You were not allowed on the street after 10 o'clock without a parent or without being chaperoned by an adult. 10 o'clock was always curfew time. But nevertheless, Vienna's a beautiful city. I used to frequent the symphony, the opera, and theater most of the time. I used to love that. In fact, I used to have standing room tickets for the state opera because I couldn't afford the sit-down tickets. And I enjoyed every opera that I have seen.
So most of the friends that you played with, were they Jewish?
Yes, most of them.
And tell me about your school that you went to.
Well, I went to a public school, and it was very enjoyable. We had some nice teachers. I feel I learned a lot, and I was always happy because I didn't know any different. And there was very little pressure. And even later on, we always had to walk to school. We had no car. There were no carpools. And I felt that I did a lot going to school. I was mostly interested in music and in art and painting, and did all the other things that most of the children do.
Did you have a lot of music in your home?
No, we did not have an instrument in the home, but my father had a very good voice, and when he used to learn Hebrew, he used to sing most of the time. My brother has a very good voice, and he used to belong to the choir in the synagogue, and I used to take him. I also belonged to the choir in all the schools I went to, and that was the extent of my music.
Did you ever notice any anti-Semitism?
Not
in
when I
school?
was a youngster. I did not know this because Vienna had such a huge Jewish community, and we traveled mostly in that circle that I did not notice, or rather, I did not even know of anti-Semitism. We led a very sheltered life, and we were very private most of the time, and I just didn't know that anti-Semitism existed. For instance, on the holidays, all the families gathered together in the synagogue. And then the people used to come home. We used to invite people to our home for lunch, Shabbat lunch, or Friday night dinner, or especially on Sukkot. My father was rather the foreman of the building, and he built a sukkah from green doors, and it used to be very pretty, and all the families used to gather downstairs and eat. Mostly the men ate in the sukkah. The women just put down the food. It was very interesting.
Tell me more about the synagogue you went to.
We went to rather two synagogues. One was a small synagogue where it was called the Belzer Shul, and the other one was the big synagogue where my brother was in the choir and where we had groups Saturday afternoon. It was called the Big Temple. And it was very, very organized. The boys used to say the Ashrei, or they used to say some of the other prayers, and it was interesting. Of course, every synagogue had a balcony for the women, and the men were downstairs. But my father was a Kohen, and I always used to love to watch him duchen, to say the prayers on Sukkot, Shavuos, and Pesach, when they went where the Kohanim duchened.
And tell me more about your Shabbat dinners at home.
The Shabbat dinners were always very interesting. Friday night, my father used to examine us what we learned the whole week, and we had to learn the parsha of the week, and we had mostly learned Pirkei Avos, the ethics of the fathers, and I became very fond of all these learnings and studying.
And what type of meals were prepared?
Well, big meals. My mother baked everything from scratch. She used to get up 4 o'clock Friday morning and bake raisin bread and challah and cake and little rolls. And we had that for lunch and for Friday night dinner and for Shabbat lunch and Shabbat dinner. And it was very delicious. She did not give us all the recipes, but sometimes I figured it out.
Did you have other relatives in Vienna that would come?
Yes. We had my mother's brother, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin. In fact, I came with her to the United States. Her name was Susie Barish. And I traveled, she was all of 14 years old, and we traveled together to the United States. When we came to the United States in August 1938, she went to Pittsburgh to be with her aunt and uncle, and I went to Philadelphia. But to this day, we keep close. We speak to each other maybe once or twice a month. We go to each other's simchot, weddings, bar mitzvahs, and whatnot. In fact, I just saw her 2 weeks ago when I was in New York, and it was very enjoyable.
Did she live close to you?
She lived very close to us in Vienna, and we spent many of holidays together.
Did you have grandparents?
My grandparents lived in Poland. Unfortunately, I only went there once when I was 4 years old, and I have very little to remember, other than my grandfather had a country store, and there were lots of eggs, milk, and butter, and we just had to eat.
Did you have friends over to your home?
All the time, yes.
Were these all Jewish friends, or did you have any
All of them were
non-Jewish?
Jewish friends, yes. In fact, I had one friend was very close to me, who unfortunately had a heart condition. And I used to go every day to tutor her and bring her her homework. I mostly tutor her in math.
What was her name?
Her name was, I think, Margie Pollock.
Do you know what happened to her?
Unfortunately, she died.
Tell me about your father's work.
My father imported textiles from England, as I told you before, and he was most of the time in the store. My mother helped, and when I became 13, 14 years old, my father asked me to help him send out bills, and I did, and I enjoyed it. And I really was always interested in business.
Who bought from him?
Customers from the street, customers that he contacted. He even contacted customers out in the country. And they all made a nice living.
Were they mostly Jewish?
Mostly, no, the customers were Gentile also. It was a store just open in the street like on any other business section.
Do you remember the rabbi at the synagogue?
I remember many rabbaim. One in the big temple was Dr. Grunwald, but the others I don't remember. There was one synagogue where they had a wonderful chazan named Frankel, and I always used to go there and listen to his choir because it was so beautiful.
And your mother helped in the store?
My mother helped in the store and raised the family and sewed and cleaned. We did have a laundress to come once a week, and that was the extent of our help.
And tell me about your sister and your brother.
My sister was in a boarding school because, unfortunately, she was deaf. And we used to go there on Sundays. It was a big school comparable to the Central Institute for the Deaf here in St. Louis. And the children learned how to cook. The children served lunch. I mean, when they were teenagers, and they were taught a trade. My sister was a wonderful dressmaker. In fact, she had a position in one of the big couture businesses in Vienna, and she was quite accomplished. And my late brother-in-law also, he became deaf at the age of 4. He hit his head, he was rocking on a horse, and he hit his head against the wall, and he injured his hearing, and he became a tailor. And they met at the school because they had boys and girls in that particular school, and then they were married after Hitler came to Vienna. And they had a child, and we were told that the child had good hearing.
And she was how much older than you?
8 years older than I.
And your brother?
My brother is 8 years younger than I. And I remember when he was born, and that was the only summer that I was sent to day camp. I always wanted to go to day camp, but since we always went to the country, there was no necessity for me to go to day camp. But my brother was born in July, and that's the only time I went to day camp. It was a big, it was quite a big joy because there were 2 girls and 1 boy, and boys are always so important. It was then, and it is now.
Any other special memories of special times with your family?
Well, I think I don't have too many special memories. As I was growing older and and got into the teenage years, then there was always trouble when Hitler marched in. So it was more or less broken up my youth. I don't remember any teenage enjoyments or so, because we were always fearful. The last time I went to a formal ball, that was the only time I remember that we were all dancing half of the night, and everybody wore formals all the way, long dresses all the way down to the floor, and it was very enjoyable. And right after that, Hitler came.
What was the date?
Hitler came into Vienna March 12th, 1938. That was on a Friday night, and we celebrated my mother's birthday. And I have never forgotten that fearful Friday night.
Tell me about it.
My father came home from the synagogue, and the candles were lit and the meal was prepared, and he shut the shutters on the outside, and he said something horrible has happened, and Hitler is marching down the street. And when I looked out the window before he closed the shutters, I saw all the military and all the soldiers with the guns passing by our house. And that was a very frightening situation. And after that, on Monday, we could no longer go to school. We were told that we cannot come to school. I walked to school, and one of the Nazis came after me and said, if he'll see me again on the street, he will shoot me. And I never got out of the house again until I left for the United States. My father did not close the store, but did not keep it open all day long anymore. And that was, too, a very frightening situation. And my mother did not have a typical Jewish look. So when I went to the American consul to get my visa, I could no longer get a passport, but they were very kind and gave me a visa and a slip of paper, and that I should go to the United States and continue school. My father had written to his brother in Philadelphia, and they requested me as an exchange student, and that's how I came to the United States.
Did you have a feeling of something happening before March 12th?
No.
Not
at all. Not at all.
So when your father came in that night and said something had happened,
it was very frightening. It was very frightening.
So you went out that one time,
yes,
and came back in,
yes,
and hid. Were you hiding in your house?
No, we were not hiding, just remained in the house. And my mother was able to go to the grocery store and get food, and we didn't do anything much else. And I left July 25th, 1938. It took 5 days to get here.
Did anyone, when you were in your house those several months, did the Nazis ever come looking for you?
No, not at that time. It was terrible confusion, and everyone was afraid, and we just stayed close to our home.
Had things happened in school previously when Hitler came into the regime? And
when Hitler came into Germany, there were many students who came to Vienna, and our classes were rather big, and we had to make more room for the others. And I remember that we had a hard time getting used to their accent, because the German accent and the Austrian accent were different. It's like the British accent and the United States accent. But we tried to get along and then incorporate all these students into the class.
But you didn't hear anything about what was happening?
Well, we did hear that it was bad in Germany, but we didn't comprehend all that. I mean, at a young age like that, you really don't understand.
Did you have newspapers at home?
Yes, yes, we read the newspapers, we had radio, and we listened to the news, and that was the extent of it.
Did your father ever talk about politics at home?
Very little, very little. But he did understand that Hitler got into Germany and that it was bad and business was bad and it was frightening. But they didn't elaborate much more.
What languages did you speak at home?
We spoke German. My parents spoke Yiddish a lot.
And what were you planning for your future at that time?
I really didn't have so much future. I always said to my father, I want to become a doctor. And my father said, an Orthodox girl doesn't become a doctor. He said, an Orthodox girl is a bookkeeper, and you find a husband and you get married. And that's what I did.
Did you have a boyfriend?
Yes, I had boyfriends. I was too young to even think about the future.
Did you belong to any organizations or clubs?
I belonged to youth groups, yes. And we went hiking. We went to, I remember going to Herzl's grave in Vienna. And all the other things that youngsters do, hiking in the Vienna woods, swimming, going to various shows, to functions, which was very interesting. But I guess at this stage in our life, we didn't understand too much, but we were always told about Zionism, and Zionism is what we were supposed to learn. At one time, we thought that we were going to Israel, but because of circumstances in Palestine at that time, we could not get any visa.
We'll pick up. We're going to stop now and pick up the next
Okay.
one. UCH. We were talking about a Zionist club you belonged to.
Yes,
What was the name of it?
Brit Bilu,
How do you spell that?
Brithbilu.
And was it just the youths in the organization that talked about going to Palestine, or was
Right.
it your family?
No, just the youth for the time being.
Tell me what you talked about with them.
We talked about how to go to Palestine. We talked about what to do in Palestine. We talked where we have to live in a kibbutz, or I don't think there was any talk about living privately, because what do you do if you go as such a youngster? And some of the people went and they spent time in the kibbutz. In fact, we are close with some of them who remained in Palestine, then Israel. His name is Avi Zwick, who became the president of the Israeli Railroad. And he was visiting here not too long ago, I would say about 6 months ago, and we reminisced about all the good times we had and all the things we did and all the hiking we did, and it was very enjoyable. And I had another friend who went to Israel illegally. They were married at the age of 17, and they went to Israel illegally, and they had to swim most of the time from Haifa to the shore. And they remained there for 10 years and couldn't make it and moved back to the United States. And I'm still very much in touch with them, and we see each other anytime I go east.
What are their names?
Their name is Susie Duhl, D-U-H-L, and her husband's name is Willie Duhl. And they live in New Jersey. I think the name is Clifton, a little town in Clifton. And anytime I go east to visit my children in New Jersey, they come to see me.
When the Nazis came in March of 1938, were you given any papers at that time?
No. No papers, no anything. Just to remain out of the streets. Just to remain in the home and not to be seen anywhere.
But you didn't have to wear any identifying?
No, not at that time.
Okay. When your father started discussing you leaving, tell me about that discussion, that decision.
I was very apprehensive and I was very frightened. I was going to a new culture and a new country and to relatives I never knew, and I just didn't know how I was going to react. It was very difficult for me, but knowing the circumstances, I had no choice. And I had to. My aunt and uncle were very nice to me, and I have two cousins in Philadelphia who were professors at that time at Temple University, and they took me under their wings and helped me with English and helped me with school and helped me to get settled. And I had a hard time in the beginning because I was always fearful that I'll be an orphan. And my brother came a half a year later, and then the two of us were alone in Philadelphia. He came to my aunt's relatives, and then we stayed together for a while. And any time I used to take a walk in the Philadelphia streets and I saw Boy Scouts, I thought they were Nazis, and I was so frightened that I ran right back into the house. And it was a very difficult experience for me, but somewhere along the line I managed.
When had your aunt and uncle left Austria?
My aunt and uncle left Austria before World War I. I think my uncle came to the United States in 1910 or 1912, I'm not sure, because at that time my father was one of three brothers. There were other children also, but I never knew them and I never even knew their names. And the men, one brother went to Argentina and one brother went to Philadelphia. My father remained in Vienna because he was in the army. And this is all I know about him. My uncle married in Philadelphia. He married a Philadelphia girl.
So when you were in your apartment with your mother and father and brother, it was decided that you would go alone. Why was it decided that you would go alone?
Because that was the first that I was able to even get out of the country without a passport or anything. And my father didn't want me to miss so much school, because from March to July we couldn't go to school.
And how come your brother didn't go with you?
He was too young and didn't get a visa. And whenever another period of visas opened, then he was on the waiting list and came with a neighbor.
So did your parents have to go and get in line to get the visa?
Yes, yes, yes.
What did you do in those months when you were still in Vienna in your apartment?
I was reading and helping my mother, or going down the store for a little while. And we did very little, listening to the radio, and we couldn't do very much.
Did you have any contact with your other friends?
Some, yes. And they were all doing the same thing. And some of them even left earlier than July.
Did you still observe Jewish rituals, holidays,
Yes.
Shabbat?
Yes.
Tell me about the day that you left Vienna.
The day I left Vienna it was a hot July, and it was very sad. And
What year was this?
In 1938. And I left with my little cousin, and the two of us traveled together. We went to Paris, And
How did you get to Paris?
we went by train, and crossing the Swiss border, there was a very frightening experience. We had to undress. We were X-rayed, and the Nazis.
Who did this to you?
Beg your pardon?
Who undressed you?
They had women who were searching for whatever money or whatever they needed and wanted, and we were just two kids by ourselves, so we really didn't have much. But we finally passed the border. I mean, they X-rayed me. They looked into my throat and my ears and my nose and X-rayed me from top to bottom. I didn't have any diamonds or money that I could smuggle. And in Paris, my late brother-in-law's brothers picked us up and took us to a hotel. And then the next morning, they took us to the boat.
What did you have with you? What did you bring
I
with you?
had my clothes, and I had whatever money I needed for the trip, but nothing extra. And we went on the boat. It took 5 days to cross
What boat was this?
the Normandy. It took 5 days to cross the ocean, and when we finally arrived in New York, my uncle and one of my cousins came to pick me up.
What was that like, looking?
That was just
New
a
York.
shock. I mean, my uncle looked very much like my father, so I didn't have any trouble recognizing him, but my father had a beard and my uncle didn't. And it was a very frightening experience, but they were very nice to me, and I spent pleasant 2 years with them. And they had a candy store, and they introduced me to help out in the store a little bit before I went back to school. And I learned how to make ice cream sundaes, and I learned how to sell the papers, and I learned English a lot.
Were you able to correspond with your family?
Yes, I was.
In what ways?
I wrote letters.
And when they wrote back to you, what did they tell you? What was happening to them?
They did not say too much because they were afraid that it might be censored at the border. So they only said that things are very difficult, and they closed the store, and Dad is at home, and it was frightening.
Did they have any frightening experiences happen to them?
Yes, my father was grabbed on the street, and he was made to scrub the street, and they tore off his beard. But where we live, it was a very nice super, and she saw how my father was treated, and she grabbed him and hid him in the basement. And he was hidden in the basement for quite a few months, and she even took food down to him. And one of the neighbors...
What was her name?
Mrs. Stibor. I don't remember her first name. S-T-I-B-O-R.
And was she Jewish?
No. And she was very nice. In fact, when my mother was alone in the apartment, one of the business neighbors came up looking for my father, and when he couldn't find him, he knocked my mother's teeth out. And this super was very nice to my sister. She used to bring her food, and she used to help her. Even though she didn't live in the same building, she lived a few streets away. And she was very nice to her. And my mother and father had affidavits and boat tickets and train tickets paid for her. And we had the last letter in July 41 that she was to have a physical and then be able to come to the United States.
Your sister?
My sister, my brother-in-law, and the baby. And somewhere along the line, they were intercepted. In fact, I just had a letter from the International Red Cross that they were intercepted in July 1941 and sent to a concentration camp. I'll let you look it up. It's a strange name, and that's all we know.
Was she was living a few houses down from you?
A few streets down,
streets down.
yeah.
And so your brother came
in 1939.
and who did he
February
come over
39, with a close friend, with a neighbor,
And how come your parents couldn't leave at that time?
because the visa was not available. They had to wait for the time of the visa, and you couldn't get the visa anytime you wanted. It had to be at the time it was available.
And when did they get a visa?
They got a visa in November 41.
And they were sponsored by his brother?
Yes.
So they all came over also on the boat to New York
Yes.
City?
Yes.
What did you think when you first saw New York City?
I was overwhelmed because I've never seen such a big city, and I've never seen such traffic. We never had a car. We just walked all over, and I was just overwhelmed. I was even overwhelmed in Philadelphia. But everyone was nice to me. They showed me the sights, and they showed me how to get around with the subway. I never knew that the subway exists. And I learned.
Did anyone ask you questions about Hitler and the Nazis?
Oh, yes, they asked, but I couldn't give them too much information. I was even too young to understand. All I could tell them is what I saw.
And where did you go to school in Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia, first I went to Central High, and then I went to Temple.
And when your parents came, what did they do?
My father started business almost immediately. Fortunately, he was able to borrow some money from relatives and opened a dry goods store in West Philadelphia, bought a house, and thank God, we were moving from one place to another for a while, but after a while we got settled, and thank God, they always made a living.
Did they learn to speak English?
Yes, they did. Not too well, but they were able to manage with my help.
And what happened with your religious beliefs?
Well, my father was always very religious, and we always moved either down the street from a synagogue or across the street from the synagogue. And my father became active in one of the synagogues, where he was treasurer, and they were very pleased with him because the synagogue was on the verge of closing up, and he turned it around and made it flourish. So I was very proud of him. That was about the time of my brother's bar mitzvah.
Your brother got bar mitzvahed in Philadelphia?
Yes. He was only 11 years old when he came.
And what year did he get bar mitzvahed?
He came in February 1939.
And when was his bar mitzvah?
His bar mitzvah was in February 41. Yes, 41, just before I got married.
And when did you learn about your sister and her husband and child?
We didn't learn, but we kept in touch with his two brothers in France, and they went to Vienna and couldn't find the parents and couldn't find their brother and my sister. And they were both working for the Red Cross, so they assumed that they have perished. Until I got to Vienna 6 years ago, and I tried to inquire more, and I got in touch with the International Red Cross, and they sent me the information about 5-6 months ago.
And tell me about your life in Philadelphia.
My life in Philadelphia was difficult. I was busy going to school, learning English. I had some sort of a social life. I used to love to go to Atlantic City. I belonged to didn't belong to a group, but I had a group of friends who were very active, and we went swimming, hiking, or whatever else youngsters do, go out on dates. And I spent a very pleasant time. When my parents came, I was busy helping them and going to school and taking care of myself.
And when did you meet your husband?
My husband was my childhood sweetheart. We met in, we lived in the same building. Excuse me. My parents and his parents were very close friends. And his sister and I grew up together. And he was about 8 years older than I,
And what
so
are
he
their
was the
names?
chaperone wherever we went in Vienna. But under Hitler, he was in Paris. He was studying at the Sorbonne. And he did not come to the States until 1941. I did not know where he was, but since I was corresponding with his sister, he found out that I'm in Philadelphia. And then he came to Philadelphia and looked me up, and 6 months after that, we were married.
And what is his name?
Max Waltuch.
And his parents and sister?
His sister's name is Helene, and his parents were, my father-in-law's name was Usher Zelig, and my mother-in-law's name was Sally Waltuch.
And when he came over, where did they go to?
They settled in St. Louis because his family had relatives here in St. Louis. And my parents settled in Philadelphia because we had family in Philadelphia and New York.
And so when did you get married?
I got married February 1942.
Did you ever go back to Vienna?
Yes, I did, 6 years ago. So it was a heartbreaking experience. And the city hasn't changed too much. They cleaned it up a little bit. They refurbished a few buildings. But the culture is still there, the music and the opera and the historic buildings and the theater. All is still there.
What about the apartment building you lived in?
The apartment building where we lived is refurbished, and I could not go indoors, but I was able to go into the courtyard. So it all brought back memories.
What about the synagogues?
The synagogue, the big synagogue, was bombed. In fact, the two big synagogues were bombed, so they're no longer there. But there is a small place in place of the big synagogue where some of the old people still pray on Saturdays, but it's very small. And the population in Vienna, the Jewish population in Vienna, is mostly Holocaust survivors or Hungarians, no one really who was there before.
What did you talk with any of the people that are living still in Vienna?
No, I didn't, because I don't know anyone. I mean, I just went to the lawyer because I wanted to I'm supposed to get the part of the widow's pension from my husband, and I had to hire the lawyer to get it, and I did. And then I went to the city hall to try and find out how, where, and when my sister was deported, and they gave me that information. This is how it goes.
Who were you there with?
I was there with my granddaughter,
What is her
Viva
name?
Raskas, and she was very thrilled to see Vienna. She didn't realize what a big culture it is and what a musical culture it is, and she was thrilled with the opera, with the museums, and even the small Jewish population. We ate in the kosher restaurant. We went to the big synagogue that was refurbished and very beautiful. And we were both frightened by the fact that there are soldiers and rifles standing outside to guard the synagogue. It was a very frightening experience. But it was beautiful. We went to the Vienna woods. We took a tour, and I showed her where I went to school and where we went dancing, and it was an enlightening experience.
Tell me about your life in St. Louis.
My life in St. Louis.
When did you get married? What was the date?
I married in 1942 and always helped my husband until I started to raise a family, and I still helped my husband. And
Helped him with, what was his business?
we started a business with in the garment industry. We made men's and boys' outerwear. And it was a family business with my brother-in-law and with my two brothers-in-law. And we all worked for a short while until the business got a little bigger. And then we each went to our particular lives. And we, I think, led a very nice life here. And we all have homes. And
did you remain Orthodox?
yes.
Did you keep a kosher home?
Yes, I do. And until I raised my family, we traveled. My husband and I traveled a lot. And we led a life which I think is comfortable until he died in 1979. And we became active in all the organizations. I'm active in Hadassah. My husband and I were active in the Hebrew Academy and in the Hebrew High School and in the synagogue, Young Israel. And this is how the time goes.
And your parents and brother, where did they remain?
In Philadelphia.
And what did your brother do?
My brother is a school teacher for the day schools, and he's still teaching.
And how many children did you have?
Do I have? I have 3 children, 1 daughter, Adina Raskas, and 2 sons, Marvin, Waltuch, and Sheldon. Sheldon is an orthodontist in Edison, New Jersey. Marvin is a stockbroker and lives in Teaneck, New Jersey. And they each have families. Marvin has 3 children, 2 sons who are married by now, and 1 daughter. And my other son has 4 children. They're not marriageable age yet, and lives in Edison, New Jersey.
And your daughter has how many children?
My daughter has 5 children, and 3 of them are married, and 2 are still single.
And so how many grandchildren do you have?
I have 12 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren, and 1 on the way.
How do you feel that your life changed from coming from Vienna, Austria?
Well, it was a big cultural shock, and as you grow older, you realize that it was not always smooth sailing. But as long as you accomplish what you have and you're able to look at things a different way, so one has to be thankful that it is what it is.
What do you feel was taken away from you?
Well, some of the freedom, materialistic things. You can't always make up what you have lost, but we are comfortable and we have to be thankful.
Is there a message that you would have that you'd like to give to people about what happened?
Well, the only message I can give that you have to keep your head high and you have to strive for your best.
Is there something else you'd like to tell your children or your grandchildren?
I hope they will enjoy the stories, even though I have told it to them many times. But this will be just a reminder what their mother and father have gone through life.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I don't think so, but I'm thankful you did that for me.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. These are my grandparents, my mother's parents, Yehudith and Moshe Barash, B-A-R-A-S-H. They lived in Poland, and they perished in the Holocaust. They were still alive when I left Vienna. Okay. These are my husband's grandparents, Moshe Leib and Rachel Waltuch, W-A-L-T-U-C-H. He was a rabbi in a small town in Russia called Waltuch. This is the home where we lived in Vienna. It is called Zirkusgasse 1, the 3 windows on the first floor and on the right was our apartment. This is my sister Sarah and her husband Leo Weiss. They perished in the Holocaust. They lived in Vienna. This is my sister Sarah with her baby Danny, and that's the last picture we received in July 1941. This is my husband and I, Max and Erna Waltuch. That was February 1st, 1942, when we were married. This was at Sheldon's bar mitzvah, August, I don't remember what the date was. August 67. And it's also Marvin and Rosalie's engagements. And the 2 grandmothers were still alive, Rachel Shapiro and Sally Waltuch. And we had a wonderful time together with the entire family. This is when my husband and I were honored at the Epstein Hebrew Academy, January 1978. It was really a wonderful honor. This is Benjamin's bar mitzvah in 1983. And most of the cousins were here and most of the family, and that's a nice family picture. This is the plaque my husband and I received in January 1978. He was very proud of this honor from the Epstein Hebrew Academy, and it says, Veshinantam levonecha, and thou shalt teach them generously. And he was very proud of that because he always believed in education.